They told me the mountains keep their own company, that if you listen long enough, they will teach you how to be alone. I learned something different. I moved up here because silence felt safer than people. The cabin sits on the spine of a ridge where the wind cuts like a blade and the pines press tight against the black. Days are thin and bright, nights are a different thing entirely. The first time I noticed it was a smell, old, damp, like something gone rotten under the snow, braided with the metallic tang of blood. It wasn't from my stove or the packing crates I'd brought. It hung low in the air the evening my dog refused to go beyond the porch. At first, the oddities were small, so I let them slide into the architecture of solitude. A set of prints circling my water barrel, too long, too deep for a deer, the flattened crowns of pine needles as if someone had dragged a heavy thing through the brush, the far-off sound of something knocking repeatedly against the side of a hollow tree as if testing whether wood could cough back. I told myself it was coyotes, drunk raccoons, the creek settling. I liked the explanation because it kept me rational. It kept me from looking for pattern. Then the thing at the edge of the firelight appeared, a hulking silhouette, not quite animal, not quite statue. I saw it once, and only a sliver of it because I froze like a stone. Horns, long, arcing like the rams carved into old church lintels, and beneath them a face that was a hollow where someone had taken the center out. It wasn't bone that shone, it was bright as paper and soaked in shadow, a skull that smiled as if the mouth remembered teeth, and the teeth remembered hunger. The hair or fur around its shoulders moved with a wind I did not feel. It did not run when my lantern quivered. It did not flee. It felt like a thing that had been waiting. After that, the house changed its rules. I stopped sleeping more than shallow bursts, my breath visible though the stove worked, because the lantern's glass would cloud and clear with the same rhythm as my heart. I began waking at precise, impossible times. 3 knocks, then silence, a rustle that stopped when my skin prickled, the distant tram of claws on stone, measured, almost polite. My dog, who had been all tail and teeth, started to stink of damp earth. He would stand at the door and stare at the dark slope until his eyes glassed and he would not move even when I called his name. Objects shifted in ways that felt deliberate. A spade laid by the porch thrown into the snow the next morning, with its handle pointing toward the trees. A single hoof print leading away from my shed, then stopping as if at a threshold I could not see. I began to hear a sound beneath all other sounds, a low, wet rasp like twigs rubbing bone, that lived in the wood and threaded through the silence. I woke one night to the rasp under my window and a shape huge and still outside, its horns scraping the eaves. I held the blanket to my mouth and tasted iron. I told myself to leave. I told myself leaving was cowardice. The mountains had already decided for me. I began to fight back the only way a man stranded on a ridge could, with light and noise and the small proofs of human order. I dragged extra planks across the windows, set the lantern on a pole outside, burned sage until my eyes stung, and the cabin tasted like old church smoke. I hammered chimes into the trees, set cans to rattle on a wire, left the radio on at night so static would drown whatever language the mountain used. It helped for a while, enough that I told myself I was winning. But the mountain does not play by human rules. It learns. The creature learned my circuits. It learned where the light faltered and how the radio hissed. One night, the chimes sang at 3 in the morning, and the dog let out a soft, strangled whine as if remembering a name. I ran out into the dark with a shotgun I didn't know how to load properly, and found the wire cut cleanly. No teeth gnaw, no paw prints, only a careful seam that suggested something with hands. There were no tracks leading away, only a bruise of flattened grass, and around it, dozens of small, deliberate things stuck into the earth. Strips of cloth like ribbons, a child's mitten, a scrap of a shirt, a coil of hair dark as a crow's wing. The hair was my hair. My breath went thin. After that, I stopped trusting mornings. Waking became an inventory. Check the stove, the water, the dog, and the door. Once, I opened it to find a line of small animal bones arranged on the threshold like a question. Another time, the dog returned, silent and shaking, his fur matted with something that smelled like the cellar after rain. He dropped a thing at my feet, an old, cracked mask made of clay, with holes cut where eyes should be, painted with the same red I had used on the porch sign the first week. The mask fit a skull too well. I put it away in the chest and locked it. That night, I dreamed of someone knocking from inside my own chest. The line between wake and sleep dissolved into a corridor of echoes. I would wake with the taste of ash and the feeling of someone breathing close enough to fog the glass. I started hearing voices on the radio, Not words, but the cadence of a voice I recognized. My father's laugh, my sister's soft curse, mixed into static, as if someone had learned to weave my memories into sound and then wore them like bait. Once, I swear, I heard my own voice outside whisper my name, and the dog answered with the sound of a snapped twig. I followed it until the pines opened into a clearing I had never seen on any map. The clearing was arranged like a room, stones set in a circle, small effigies on stakes, and there, hung from a low branch, was my coat. It smelled like me, and like winter, and like something rotten. Beneath it, the snow was smeared into a long shape, hollowed and packed, and clearly meant to be a figure. Around the figure's head, someone had placed a skull, not an animal skull, not quite, but something like the shell of a face, with horns lashed to it. My hands trembled so badly, I left footprints that curved away from the circle. I was not the first to stand there. When I looked back toward the trees, I thought I saw movement. Dozens of shapes standing just beyond the reach of the lantern, pale faces peering through the trunks. They held their heads at angles men do not. They were waiting for me to take the next step. That night, I decided I would end it, or at least stop pretending I could bargain with whatever lived in those trees. I packed the remaining gasoline into a rusted can, tied the dog to my belt with a strip of canvas, and walked back to the circle as if walking into court. The lantern swung like a metronome and threw my shadow into the pines in long, trembling fingers. The air tasted like pennies and old bread. Every breath felt like chewing on tin. The radio in my pocket hummed with a thread of static that sometimes sounded like a name. I hated how the sound fit my teeth. When I reached the clearing, the circle seemed to breathe. The effigy lay where I'd left it, now partially melted by the day's weak sun, its skull crooked and its horns crusted with sap. Around the stones, the ground was patterned with new prints. Small, careful, too many for any animal. The shadows between the trees were not still. Shapes leaned forward like guests who had been waiting since before my birth. They did not move with limbs. They turned like windmills, their faces, if they were faces, tilted at angles that made my neck ache. I set the can down and lit a match. The flame looked ridiculous against the dark, a child's eye in a wolf's mouth. As the first lick of fire touched the straw, the sound began. It was a chorus at first, low and layered. Then it honed into a single tone I knew too well. A laugh I had heard when I was a child, a cough my uncle used to make, the small cursing my sister used when she stubbed her toe. The radio in my pocket cut sharply to static and then to my own voice, speaking the name of the mountain, the name of the town, the name I had used to make myself small and invisible. I dropped the match. The dog whined. I tried to run. The pines closed like hands. Branches hooked at my coat and left thin tears across my palms, warm and sticky, as if I had touched new wound. The creatures stepped from between trunks into the shallow light, some tall and string-legged, some squat and clotted in moss, and all of them wore pieces of what had been mine. A mitten, a scrap of a shirt, a ribbon from a hair tie. They did not speak. Their mouths moved and only breathed the cold. One came close enough that I could see the skull beneath the thing that wore it, my jawline, my scar along the cheek where a falling rock had cut me once. It was a mimicry so precise my stomach folded. I smelled myself, sweat and soil and a sweetness like rot. The dog tore the rope and lunged. There was a sound like a twig snapped in half, and then a silence that filled the clearing with its weight. I pressed my hands to my ears until I tasted blood and crawled back to the stones, thinking only of the lantern and the match and the fire. When I looked up, something hung from the low branch, the dog's head, gray and slack, and beneath it a mask nailed to a stake. My face made small and hollow, painted with the tired red I had used on the porch sign. For a long time, I could not tell if I was shouting or whispering. The forest answered in the voice of my mother, telling me to come inside for supper. They did not kill me outright. They prefer the slow work, to hollow you like a tree, to teach you their patient geometry. In the weeks since, I have found myself waking in places I do not remember walking to, my hands sticky with sap and clay. Sometimes the radio finds my voice and plays it back to me, slowed and layered, like a man speaking through water. Sometimes I wake with new things in my pockets, a ribbon, a child's shoe. I have tried to burn those tokens. The flame dies as if someone leans over it and breathes. There is one final thing, the thing that refuses to let me sleep even when the stove clamps down and the lantern is put out. In the dark, at the edge of hearing, I can feel it learning the cadence of my breathing. It maps my pauses, my stutters. Tonight, when I held the mirror up to the moon, my face was clean and then not. The reflection smiled back with a mouth I did not recognize. It smiled with my mouth.
Subscribe to Horror Story Bar.